Hello and welcome to the channel. I'm Chris LeComte, although you may have known me as referee or Mr. Official throughout the years. Today, Mario Nasta rejoins for part 2 of our 3-part series on assistant refereeing to discuss the calls ARs need to be aware of and how to make those calls effectively. For a quicker overview of these calls, without all the examples and discussion Mario and I will go into throughout this video, please see ARing 102. For an explanation of the rules you need to know, please see Assistant Reffing The Rules, that's ARing 101 or 111 on this channel. Now let's dive in. Mario, thank you for joining me again to discuss the calls that assistant refs need to make. So last time we discussed the rules that ARs have to keep in mind, and now you're going to go over how do they make those specific calls and what goes on there.
Yeah, so I mean there's a lot, right? There's always 3 bludgers, 4 beaters moving around the pitch. So even if you fully grasp the rules, there are definitely some calls that will get missed or often get missed and should be paid attention a little bit more, or calls that people just get wrong.
Yeah, and let's clean those up. So first, missed beats. What do you do on missed beats?
Yeah, so there are a couple things this encompasses, right? But oftentimes the biggest reason a beat is missed or is not called is because the ref didn't see it, right? Please, if you are a beat ref, watch the beaters, watch the dodgeballs at all times, right? If you're an AR, that should be your primary focus when you're on the field. So first ones that get missed a lot are kick beats. They happen more than you think, right? Specifically, especially at brooms up, really need to watch as people are sprinting in for that ball and just trying to slap it or kick it if they get there a full step before the other person, right? Watch for that. If they are propelling that ball in any way where it actually lifts off the ground, it has become live, and you need to be there paying attention to see if anybody gets struck by it before it hits the ground.
Right, I've seen top tier beaters, but the first person I ever saw do it was Chad Brown on the old BGSU team.
Yep.
He was holding a bludger. I think he was actually playing for the Riff in this game, but he was holding a bludger, and he was holding it by his side, and he just dropped it and then punted it into a beater who was trying to tackle him.
Yeah, super illegal, and definitely needs to get called, right?
Right.
At the same time, if that player under today's rule books takes more than one step towards you after getting hit, they can't make that contact. Remember that, everybody. Contact needs to be stopped. You need to stop trying to make contact as soon as you're beat.
Right. Both beats and double beats. What's the difference here?
Yeah, so terminology definitely kind of gets skewed depending on where in the country you are. I think double beats gets used to kind of describe a lot of things. I'm going to break it up into trading, which is 2 beaters beating each other, often resulting in the both beat call as section 1, and double beats meaning a time more than one person is beat by a single dodgeball, right? So on the first half, right, trading and both beats, there's every single game you're going to get to a point where 2 armed beaters are looking at each other and they both throw, right? It's going to happen. Important to watch, right? For a bludger to be live, it needs to be out of a beater's hand before they're hit themselves, right? So if both beaters in a duel let go of their ball, meaning both balls are in the air at the same time, then they're both live. And if both beaters gets hit, it's a trade. Both people are beat. Often the call that refs will make is both beat, or they'll say beat. Like whether you want to say beat twice or both beat, that's kind of your prerogative. But that is what I consider a trade. And it's really, really important as an AR, you're watching to make sure both balls actually got into the air before either person was hit, right? Because as soon as you've been struck as a beater, even if you're in that motion of a throw, that ball is not live if it leaves your hand after you've been struck.
Right, and when that happens, you want to make sure you do the safe call first, and then call the other person beat.
100%. If one of them gets that ball off late, make sure you make it clear first that the player being struck by the dead bludger is safe. That is the more important of the calls. You 100% should be making it first.
Absolutely. So double beats. How do you watch for those?
Yeah, so important, right? As a beat ref, I've said it many times, right? You need to watch the beaters and you need to watch the bludgers, right? As soon as a beater has made a dodgeball live, as soon as they've intentionally propelled it, it remains live until it hits the ground, right? So if they throw it real hard, it hits someone in the shoulder and it bounces up in the air, it's still live, right? You need to watch that ball until it hits the ground, because the decent chance, especially in the quaffle game, it could bounce back and forth and hit a second person, right? It can only hit players on the opposing team, or it can only beat, I should say, or knock out players on the opposing team to the player who propelled it. But you should be watching and making sure if it hits anybody other than that primary target, you are very loudly and very clearly calling that second beat, right? It gets missed a lot because very often, as soon as the first person gets hit with the dodgeball, you turn to look at that person and say, "You're beat," and you stop watching the bludger as it might go out of your field of view. You should try at all times to watch that bludger until it's hit the ground, and then call your beats to both players. Ideally, call the beat to the first player as soon as you see it, but call it while watching that bludger continue to go.
Right. One of the most common places I've seen this is a beater goes to try and clear out another beater when they're on offense, bringing up offensive bludgers. They whale it, they slam it off the defensive beater, it then bounces and hits the point defender in the back.
100%.
They both should be called beat, but oftentimes only one of them is called beat, only the beater is.
Yeah, that's very, very good call. The other place I would say watch for it a lot is in the snitch on pitch game.
Right.
Because beaters and seekers all consolidate into such a small area, there's a lot of times where maybe it hits two beaters, or maybe it hits the seeker and then the snitch, or seeker, then the snitch, and then bounces into a beater as well. Like, a lot of things can happen in those close proximities, so watch for both. The last thing I'll mention when it comes to double beats is oftentimes when one team has possession and the other team doesn't, right? The unarmed beater from another team will come up and try and get in the face of one of the armed beaters. That beater might be trying to throw past the person in their face at the armed beater behind. If it becomes live, if they get that ball off before the unarmed beater touches it, but it skims that unarmed beater in any way and still moves on to hit the beater in the back, you need to call both of them beat. Oftentimes in those situations, only one of the two beaters will be beat, because the beat ref, as soon as they see it make contact with the first person, they'll call beat, or they're only watching the arm beater in the back because they think that's the target, and they ignore or don't notice that skim on the unarmed beater.
Right. And then last but not least is kind of the timing of the call. So we talked extensively about struck beaters in the previous video with AR 101. But just to recap, if a beater is struck, you say to hold off on the beat call?
Yes. So if a beater is struck, right, by a dodgeball, they become a struck beater. They are not technically knocked out until that ball becomes dead, which occurs either when that ball hits the ground or when it is caught by another player, right? Until that ball becomes dead, the beater who was struck is not beat, because they can continue to try and catch that ball, right? That is the only thing they can do, to be clear. And if you see them doing anything else, you should immediately send them back to hoops and adjudicate the proper foul, as we discussed previously. But as a struck beater, you are not beat until that ball is dead, and you are allowed to try and get that ball. Many times a ref will call a player beat before that ball gets a chance to hit the ground, and it can confuse or distract them and prevent them from getting a chance to catch it. Or they might catch it, but because you called them beat, you stop paying attention and you don't even see the catch, right? I've actually been called beat a couple times. When I caught the ball at like the side of my body or an area that it's not easy to see. The beat ref calls me beat, and I turn to them and I show them the ball, and they're like, "Oh, I stopped watching." I'm like, "Yeah, don't do that. I'm not beat." And then I keep playing, because usually they'll let me go at that point. But it's really important. You should not be calling that beat until they're truly beat. Because on the same time, right, a beater on the other team, once they hear beat, might go off to start doing something when that beater isn't actually beat, and maybe they catch it and then hit them from behind because they listen to the ref, which you never want.
Right. I remember in one of the few times I played beater, this actually came up, where a bludger hit me and bounced straight up in the air.
Yep.
And the beater who threw it and myself both jumped up and caught it at the same time and fell to the ground with the bludger. And the AR didn't call either of us, well, me specifically beat, but didn't call anyone beat until after wrestling for a while. He finally wrenched it out of my grip, and then the AR said, "You're beat." I said, "Worcester 19, you're beat." And I remember that call because it was so good.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because again, you need to get sole possession of that bludger for it to count as a catch. and for you to become move back from struck to in play status, right? That's awesome. I love to hear good calls like that.
And in your last point is probably the thing I hear from captains more often than anything in ref meetings. As I say, anything else, and they go, "Could you just make sure your ARs are loud?"
Yeah, it's possibly the single most said thing in any ref meeting in the sport, and still doesn't happen.
Right.
It's brutal. So speaking as an AR and as a coach and a player, right? Like I've been in every situation. It is brutal across the board to try and guess what's happening, right? You should never have to do it. You should just know, and the way you know is by a ref loudly making it clear what happened, right? So if you're a ref, please, maybe you're not used to being loud, maybe it's not something you have to do in your normal life, but please practice a little bit before you get onto that pitch. Be loud with your calls. Make sure people can hear you.
Absolutely. All right, next is late throwback. So this is that natural motion conversation where that wasn't quite natural.
Yeah, that's a good call. So again, we talked about it a little bit just now, but once a beater has been struck, right? Once they've been hit by a live dodgeball, they should not be turning and dropping the ball or rolling it or taking a step and then dropping it, any of that, right? As soon as you are struck, the very first action you need to take if you held a ball is dropping it, right? And this kind of goes for chasers too. They're not struck, they're knocked out immediately, but again, they shouldn't be making late throws either. As soon as you are hit by a live bludger, you need to immediately drop the ball. Now, to be clear, right, there's a little bit of no harm, no foul here that goes into the drop concept, right? If you place the ball directly on the ground, like sometimes people get beat and they literally just put it down, as long as that doesn't inconvenience the other team from picking it up, or I should say, as long as it also doesn't convenience their own team from picking it up, that is okay. You should let that go as no harm, no foul. If they were at a full sprint, they got beat, and instead of dropping it, they slow down and then put it down directly where they were, allowing their own team to come up and get it, that is, it's not a late throwback, but it's still a late action and should be called as such, right?
Right.
I once got a card, so I'll be honest. Back in the day, I used to, if I got beat by a beater, I would actually, a lot of the times if they were close to me, I'd toss them the Bludger, right? If you're not expecting that, it might confuse the hell out of you. You might drop the ball, you might get confused, and it might affect play, right? If it affects play, it's moved past the no harm, no foul, and I should get the card because I am not following that concept of letting them just get to the ball as quickly as smoothly as possible.
Absolutely. It's supposed to be natural. You drop it. If you're running forward and you drop it, the ball will also go forward with you.
100%. And that's something I think refs need to also recognize a bit, right? Like if I'm a bludger and I've got the ball cocked up, I'm ready to throw, and I get hit, even if I just drop it, it's going to move in the direction I was running. That's not me late propelling. That's not me throwing the ball. That's me following the rules. You shouldn't be stopping that ball or trying to give it quickly back to the player. You should let it roll, right? Like if someone's in motion when they get hit, expect the ball they were controlling to be in motion when it's dropped.
Right, and don't forget, as a ref, you have a lot of tools at your disposal. You can call it no harm, no foul, the turnover for late natural motion, the blue card for playing after beat, the yellow card for willfully ignoring knockouts. You have pretty much the full board of penalties to use at your disposal in the event based on how serious the infraction is.
100%. And the last thing I want to touch, because it does specifically happen a lot in the beater game, right? Like beaters will often, especially when they don't have control or they're on defense and they're trying to keep that ball to themselves as an offensive beater is attacking them, right? They'll very often kind of try and bait and wait for the throw and then either roll it back or toss it back to their owners, right? When doing that, right, the only time that toss or roll or whatnot is considered natural motion and is allowed is if it could not be reasonably stopped after they were struck by a dodgeball, right? So again, if I'm like in the motion of completely turning around and throwing a ball behind me back to hoops and I get hit halfway through, I could very reasonably stop completely spinning and just drop the ball where I am, right? And that's what's expected. If I choose to finish that full step and then make sure the roll is going towards my own hoops, That is a late throwback. That is not legal, and that should be a turnover.
At least.
At least a turnover. Good call. Right. Often with this one, I like to give warnings, especially in the video game for the first occurrence, because unfortunately refs do call this very differently from one game to the next. So I definitely do want to give a warning on the first one, unless it's very egregious or very clearly affected play, and then move to the next step of the foul.
Absolutely, and that first warning will set your bar for the game. So you have to make sure you're consistent. If you give a warning for something that you're going to foul card it the next time, and you got to make sure you're consistent. You do that throughout.
Yeah, and I do want to actually point out here, right? If I let's say it's a black team versus white team, right? If white team commits that foul first, right? They do a late rollback, and I give them a warning. Me giving them a warning does not mean I've given every player on the field a warning, right? It might mean I've given their whole team a warning, but it definitely doesn't apply to black team in any way, shape, or form, right? So if I've given that warning to white team, the first time it happens for black team, I should be giving that same warning. That's that consistency piece and that fairness that you should apply to both teams.
All right, this has to go a bit with late throws, but this is just a specific case of passes and shots.
Yep, so I know we touched base on it when we were going through the rules presentation in Beaters 101, but I wanted to again talk about it here, right? Natural motion allows a player to release that quaffle without a turnover, but it is unscorable, right? It means that if they're in that motion, if they can't reasonably stop it before letting it go, and I do want to stress again that reasonably stopping it, that ball is allowed to set sail and go, right? But it is not scorable, and it does not become scorable until a player on the defensive team gains possession of it, or a player on the offensive team touches it, right? So again, right, a keeper tipping that shot does not suddenly make it scorable.
Right, and one way to think about it is every ball on the field has two functions, right? It's got the fun function and the boring function. So the problem with the fun function, you can score with it. But if you're hit with a bludger while it's still in your hand, you can't do the fun function anymore. You can only do the boring one of passing it to someone.
100%.
With the bludger,
with that boring function could be a pass through a hoop, right? I've seen it happen a couple times where like a natural motion shot goes off, it goes through the hoop, it's not a goal, but a player on the same team picks it up behind him. That's legal. That's completely okay. Just because it was a shot and it was unscorable doesn't mean it's a turnover and it's dead. It just doesn't result in a goal, right? So as a ref, you shouldn't see it go through and be like, oh, it doesn't count, turn the ball over. It's like, no, if it was natural motion, they can still pick it up.
And a point of strategy for players is play till you hear the whistle. So if that ball goes through and you're not, if the whistle hasn't been blown for a good goal yet, pick it up and dunk it back through a second time.
100%. Highly recommend. I can't tell you the number of times I've been on the field and I've seen a ball go right through a hoop and hit a player on the same team, like in the chest, and they're like, yeah, that's fine, and they just let it go by because they know it was a goal, and then for some reason the ref was out of position and didn't see it, and then that player who let it hit them in the chest and didn't just catch it and do a second one beats themselves up, right? Because you knew it was a goal, but nobody's perfect. You don't get every call, so give yourself that chance to pick it up and score a second time.
Right. As a ref, if I can say that like there's those weird oblique angle shots that very few people are in the right position to see, and gonna come down to what the goal ref and the head ref see. Like, does it look like it went through? Did it look like it went off to one side or the other? And if you're on the other side, no whistle's been blown, dunk it. No ref's gonna card you or penalize you for playing until the whistle blows.
100%. Last thing I'll touch on here again is that reminder for that natural motion to count and to make that ball, allow that ball to be in the not so fun category you put it at, right, as opposed to being completely dead. The player must have been in contact with the ball before being struck by a bludger, right? So let's say quaffle play is kind of deteriorating. You're just trying to kick it either for a reset or a last-ditch shot. Doesn't matter if you're in the motion for that kick. All that matters is if you touched the ball or not before you get beat, right? You don't get to just finish a kick if you got struck an inch before you touched the ball.
Absolutely, that's an important distinction. All right, now how to make immunity calls, right? We went over this rule, and you did a great job making it a lot easier to understand. So
yeah, so definitely again. So big one, right? Again, we talked about it. for immunity to be claimed, the first thing that needs to happen is there needs to be a third bludger, right? And for that third bludger to exist and be designated, two things must occur. First, one team must have possession of both dodgeballs. Second, that third bludger must be dead, right? Again, if that third bludger has been thrown and is in the air, it is live. It cannot become the third bludger until it hits the ground and is dead. Now, once that third bludger situation exists, the team without possession of any bludgers may claim immunity. Again, the way you claim immunity is you got to get your fist above your shoulder. Until it is a closed fist above the shoulder, you have not claimed immunity, right? Once it gets there, though, you are immune, and your immunity lasts until you have gained possession of that third bludger. It doesn't last until your fists go down. It lasts until you gain possession, right? So if you run up to that ball and you get there and you lower your fist to pick it up, you are still immune until you gain possession, right? Now, with that, immunity comes some responsibility. You need to immediately move for the third bludger, and once there, you need to immediately make an attempt to gain possession, right? So you can't just stand over it. You can't just lollygag, walk around the field all willy-nilly with your fist up. You can't have your fist up and then decide, oh, well, I could maybe make a hit on that beater because they're not paying attention now that my fist's up, right? None of that's legal. As soon as that fist goes up, you have immunity. You must continue to claim immunity as long as that third bludger remains the third bludger. And once you get there, you must immediately try to gain possession of it.
So if you're ARing and you see someone falsely, they claim immunity and they shouldn't be able to. What are the steps you take in terms of when do you card, when don't you? What do you do?
For sure. So two things. The first thing I want to ask myself every time when I see an immunity claim that isn't legal, right? Could the beater reasonably know that their claim is false, right? Like, if they were running for a ball and all the other beater play is behind them, it's unreasonable for them to know whether their immunity is still reasonable, right? If, however, they're looking forward at the entire field and can see every bludger, right? And they see somebody throw a ball and they know they're no longer immune, but they still claim it, they're intentionally violating it, right? So first thing I look for is reasonably, could they know what they're doing is legal, right? If they can't, if they don't know, if it's not reasonable for them to realize, I immediately, as an AR, want to give them that information. Be like, hey, no immunity, right? You're not immune, no immunity. If they immediately lower their fist and just continue what they're doing, no harm, no foul. I'm not going to even send them back to hoops, right? There are going to be plenty of times where you're running for the ball. You were allowed to have your fist up at the beginning. Just before you get there, they throw the ball. That's fine. That's life. You move on. If it doesn't affect play, no harm, no foul. Next step, right? Maybe even though it was unreasonable for you to know you lost possession, or lost immunity, I should say, you claiming it somehow affected play, right? Because the beaters on the other team had no idea. One of them maybe didn't realize you were no longer immune, and he held the ball waiting for a throw but couldn't make it because your fist was still up. In that case, it was unreasonable for you to know, but it still affected play. I'm going to send you back to hoops, right? Next step, and this is where we start actually getting into the cards, if it was, reasonable for you to know, or it was unreasonable for you to know and it seriously affected play, or you continued to play after I tried to tell you because you just weren't paying attention or super focused in, something like that, that's where we're going to elevate to, actually pulling out the card book, start giving somebody, taking them off field, making them serve minutes in the box.
Right. You commit the sin, you go to the bin.
That's simple. One thing I do want to, again, just really mention for all ARs, right? That immunity lasts until you have possession of the ball. That means any beat attempt made by the team with possession, if that beat attempt, if the forward motion, if the natural motion for that throw or kick or whatever they're going to do, right, begins before the player with immunity has lost immunity, if it begins in any way before that immunity is lost, that beat is not valid against that immune player, right? So I start throwing, right, as you're bending down. If you haven't touched it and I'm already in my throwing motion, you are still immune from my bludger, even if you pick it up before I hit. right? And that's something that does not get called enough, and it's something that makes people feel like the other team's guarding, not because they actually haven't broken any rules at that point. It's just you're still immune and should be called as immune.
Correct. I mean, guarding third bludger interference has definitely been reduced in terms of what it actually is.
For sure. And I think that's part of the reason that a lot of players get upset and are like, he's guarding and what the heck? Like, it's not because the other team is actually doing anything illegal. They're still allowed to throw at you and start that motion. It's just you're still immune, right? You're not actually beat, and they can't actually make a play on that bludger, that third bludger, until you've gained possession. So it's just really important part for the refs to make sure they're calling correctly.
Right. Immune players are not targets for reasonable beat attempts.
100%. So, like, they could still throw it at you. It's just that doesn't make the third bludger not a third bludger anymore, right? So, like, that third bludger, even if they throw it at you, the third bludger is still the third bludger. You're still immune, and they can't make any play towards that bludger or towards you until you've gained the possession.
So, speaking of third bludger interference and guarding the third and TBI and all of that,
yes,
so this has been changed from previous rulebooks, right? When I first started, guarding the third was a wide array of things, and it might have been a yellow, it might not have been, and there's been a lot of changing in this rule. So what is the current state of this?
Yeah, so as we were just kind of starting to get into, right? Third bludger interference. So that ball on the ground that has been designated a third bludger, the team with possession cannot in any way interact with that ball on the ground. So like they can't throw their dodgeballs at the ball on the ground, right? They cannot interact with the player who is claiming immunity trying to get to that ball in such a way, like they can't get in their way. They can't body block or do any of that. They also cannot they also need to make a reasonable beat attempt in order for that bludger to no longer be considered the third bludger, right? So we discussed it a little pretty in depth in our previous video, but right, what that ultimately means is if you're one of the people with possession of the two bludgers that are not the third bludger, you can throw your ball as much as you want, but for that third bludger to stop being a third bludger, the throw you are making needs to be a reasonable beat attempt at a player on the other team, right? Again, I'll go over it. For me, that means if it's at distance, the throw is within a step of that player, or that player had to actively get out of the way. Or if they're close by, it needs to have a serious, clear reason why it missed, right? If you're close and you're throwing full force and you miss and it goes flying off pitch, there needs to be a very good reason for why that happened, or it was not reasonable. Once you've made that throw, which again is allowed even if it is unreasonable, you need to either go for your own ball or still leave that third bludger alone if what you did was unreasonable, right? Like, you can still make your throw all you want, but if that throw was unreasonable, you are still expected to leave that third bludger alone on the ground, and the player claiming immunity is still immune until they gain possession.
So what are beaters allowed to do when there is a third bludger on the field?
Great question. They're allowed to do anything they were previously allowed to do in regards to the rest of the game, right? They can still run around and beat players in the other team. They can still position wherever they want, right? So to be clear, that means they can walk right up to and stand like right on top of that third bludger, as long as they're not in the way of the other team coming to get it, right? So maybe that means you don't literally keep it between your legs, because then you're going to be in the way, but you can stand a foot or two away from it and be ready to try and engage with the person coming to get it, right? The thing you cannot do again is you can do it, but it won't count as a beat. If you start any motion for a beat towards that player before they have gained possession of the ball, your beat is invalid, and it does not remove the third bludger status, right? So if they're running towards it, they lower their fist to go for the pickup, and you beat them in the shoulder, not only are they not beat, you also cannot try to then steal that ball before they've gained possession, right? You can't bend over, you can't get in their way. They're still immune, that's still the third bludger, and they still have to be allowed to gain possession of it without you interfering in any way.
Right, there's a bright line there. If they don't have it, you can't start your throw.
Exactly. I mean, that's the big part, right? Again, I'll just mention what the foul is. I know we went over it in depth before, but again, if any of those things happen and there is a foul, It's not a cardable foul. It's a double bludger turnover and a back to hoops for the player committing the foul.
Artie, now stopping play. So this looks like when play stops, what should an AR do, not how does an AR get play to stop?
Correct. Real quick, we can just go over it, right? If you're an AR and you want play to stop, you put your hand up when you see a foul and try and call out to the head ref, right? You don't have a whistle. You should never just be yelling, everybody stop moving, everybody stop. Like, no, you put your hand up and you call over to your HR to try and stop play. Once that's occurred, once the whistle is blown and once play is actually stopping, you do have some very clear responsibilities here, right? First up, watch all the beaters, right? Make sure nobody moves. There are 4 beaters. There's usually at least 2 of you as AR, maybe 3, depending on what's going on, what level of game this is, right? Watch each of the beaters and make sure as soon as that whistle's blown, the broom's being dropped where they were, right? This goes for everybody, right? It's really, really annoying as a player to watch a player on the other team get to make 3 or 4 steps and get in the way of what could have been a drive because they're getting to move during a stoppage of play, right? So make sure you're watching for that. The second part of this is also watch the bludgers when stopping play, right? It's usually really, really simple to watch the quaffle when a play stops. There's the HR and the LAR are usually generally in the area paying attention, so that's usually taken care of. What often can go awry is the bludgers and what's happening with them when a whistle is blown. So I got 2 things here, and the first one, may not technically be in the rule book. I think it should be, and I don't think anybody's going to complain about it, so I'm just going to say it, put it out there for everybody, and especially if you talk to people about it before you start reffing, there's going to be no confusion. But if someone is running for a bludger completely uncontested and that ball is moving, when the whistle is blown, they should be stopping moving and it'll keep moving away from them. That's pretty much unfair to them, especially just like they have no control over it and it's going to delay the pace of them getting that ball back when play starts again. Me personally, I say you stop that bludger and place it where it was at the time of the whistle. It is important to note this is for uncontested bludgers, right? So on the flip side, if 2 people are running for a dodgeball or they're running from different directions or in any way, shape, or form you think that dodgeball on the ground could be contested, when play stops, make sure the 2 beaters stop where they were. You do unfortunately have to let the ball go at that point, right? Let it end where it lies. Let them recommence their contested attempt for that ball when the whistle starts play again.
And one other thing here is that a ball in the air is returned to the player that threw it if they are still mounted, if they're still eligible to hold one.
100%. Yeah, this is definitely talking about specifically balls on the ground that I'm talking about as far as stopping. Right. If it's in the air, to Chris's point, 100% should be going back to the person who, propelled it to start. Other one I want to talk about is boundaries, right? So if a ball goes out of bounds during a stoppage, the rule is you place it 2 yards in from the boundary line where it went off the pitch. That's changed recently with the new rule book and with the the changes to the boundary line and everything that's going on with that. So if you have been paying a ton of attention to that, that's an important note for you. The one exception to this, though, is if a player was actively pursuing that ball and it went off pitch and they're within the 2 yard distance, you shouldn't then pick it up and, place it back further away from them. Put it at their feet. They don't have possession of it. They still need to bend over and pick it up when it starts. But if they're within that 2 yards, you should be placing it at their feet.
Right. And one terminology I use for that is to say, bludger is live on the ground.
Yep.
So to indicate that beater, it's not yours yet. You can't just pick it up and start with it. You got to pick it up once play starts.
For sure. Very good. Very good way of describing that.
And one other thing with stopping play, if I'm as a head referee, when an AR wants to stop play, another piece of information I need is which team committed the foul. So I always ask for ARs to put their hand up, like you said, but then also to point to the side of the field where the team that committed the foul is.
100%. And I think that's something that should be gone over at the start of every game with your ARs. It's a super important thing to note until it gets a little bit more widespread within the sport. Super, super convenient and helps the HR a lot.
Oh, a ton. I know exactly when to stop play. That's great.
Yeah, especially because our advantage roll right now is not the best.
It could use a couple touch-ups. Shameless plug. I have it. Yeah.
Just a few.
Just a few. All right, so if play is live and the bludger rolls off the pitch, I mean, I personally have found this rule very, what's the word I'm looking for? I've always found it reasonable and fairly straightforward, but a lot of people seem to have trouble with this.
Yeah, I think simple would be a good word to describe a rule.
Intuitive, even.
Yet it seems to go wrong a lot. And I think this actually ties into a lot that first suggestion I have for all beat refs, which is watch the beaters and their balls, right? If you're not watching, this is going to go awry. But as soon as a bludger rolls off pitch, immediately find the closest unarmed beater, right? The closest beater who is eligible to pick that one up, regardless of who threw it, and designate them as the inbound, right? Give them permission to leave the pitch and go grab that dodgeball. From there, only that inbound designated player may leave pitch to go get the bludger, right? Unless for some reason they become knocked out or they choose that they don't want to retrieve it because maybe there's another ball on the ground closer to them that they want to go get, or they want to try and lay. Like, there are a million things they can choose to do, so if they choose not to go get it, that's fine, that it's anybody's game. But if they are actively pursuing it and they've been designated as the inbounder, no one else can go for it. This is really, really important to note because there are a lot of times where a ball is off pitch, someone is close to off pitch with a ball of their own, so they're not eligible to be designated as that inbounding player, and someone else gets designated and they choose to then throw their ball like back to their own hoops or try to make a beat attempt or something and then go off for that ball. That is completely illegal until the player who is designated as the inbounder is either beat or has otherwise chose not to go for it. No one else can leave pitch to get that ball.
And I find one thing is that it should be the closest unarmed beater who's like even running toward that sideline.
Yeah, for sure. If nobody is showing any intent at all to go for it, I think that's a really good call out. Like, then you don't need to designate someone. You as the beat ref should still go over to that ball and make sure it's not rolling, to the next county. Make sure you bring it over and put it just outside the boundary line for someone to come and inbound. But yeah, that's a very good call. If nobody's trying to go for it, you can leave it there and allow anybody to try and go for it at a later point.
Right, and players can be beat until they are completely off the pitch. So this happened in a game to me. I was for some reason assistant reffing a game, and I think it was Tyler Walker. He jumped over the pitch boundary. He didn't run over the pitch boundary. He jumped over the pitch boundary, and someone threw a bludger at him, and it hit him before he hit the ground. And we had to look up the rule after the game to make sure, but I called him beat. And it's the case. If you're not touching the ground out of bounds, you are still live and you can still be beat. So you're not immune. That designated player is not immune until they get completely off the pitch.
And that interaction is really important, right? But it's also true that they are immune as soon as they get out of that pitch line, right? So if the ball's in midair coming behind them, as soon as they've touched that ground, they are now immune, and that beat will not send them back to hoops.
Right.
I cannot tell you the amount of times I have stepped off pitch and then felt a ball hit me in the back, and I've just been like, wow, this is great. I'm loving life right now. I love it. It's incredible. But also important to note here, as an AR, if people are coming towards the out-of-bounds line to try and get that third bludger, do not put it inbounds. Like, if you're stopping it because it was going to roll like a million feet away and you want to like keep it in close proximity so you don't have to stop the game, do not put it in the pitch. Always put it like just outside the pitch so that that beater running for it can get a chance to complete the inbounding procedure if they want, right? Give them that opportunity to get out of bounds and become immune for the inbounding procedure. By putting it inside, you can severely disadvantage that player.
Right, but if there's no one going for it, then you do have to bring it back inside.
Correct. Yeah, this is very much if someone's actively pursuing it, never put it inbounds. Let them get to that out of bounds point by a step.
Absolutely.
And then one last thing to note here. Again, right, I'll talk about it in both the beater game and the quaffle game just because I think it gets forgotten a little bit, but it's more specifically the beater game. anybody inbounding a ball, that ball is not live, right? So in the quaffle game, right, you can't take a shot from out of bounds. It's just like that beat before, that natural motion concept. It's unscorable until it's either been possessed by your own team possessed by the other team or touched by your team, right? In the beater game, same concept, right? Beater inbounding a dodgeball, they cannot throw the ball and have it be live, right? So they can throw it at a player on the other team if they want, but that player will not be beat because that bludger is not live, right? They need to be back in the pitch to make a beat attempt with a live bludger.
And they have to be completely on the pitch. Both
Yes.
feet in bounds.
100%. I believe it's 1 foot out of bounds to be considered out of bounds. So like if you're running away, as soon as any part of you touches out of bounds, you're out of bounds. On the reverse side, you need to be entirely in bounds to be considered in bounds.
I think that's the case as well. I don't have the rulebook right in front of me, but I think that's the case as well.
99% sure. We're going to stick with it. I'm feeling
consistent at least.
Yeah. There you go.
Mario, thank you so much for imparting your knowledge on us and allowing all of us to be better assistant referees. I know I've definitely learned quite a bit just from making this video with you, and I hope that a lot of people learn a lot from you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I think the AR specific part of reffing is not focused on enough. I know there's a lot of talk about making refs better and doing this, doing that, but I think a lot of the resources that currently exist are more for the awful side of the game, whether it's you're an HR or an LAR. And I think definitely the ARs are underrepresented in the information that's put out, but also I think ARs, more often than not, having bad ARs is worse than having a bad HR in a lot of games, because of how much there's three more balls in the beater game, right? So I think it's super, super important that we as a group work on improving our AR performance and giving them the tools they need to kind of succeed.
Thank you so much, Mario, for joining us and imparting your knowledge upon us. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment if you have any questions, and come back on Monday for the final video in the series on assistant refereeing. In the meantime, please travel safely, and as always, thank you for watching.